Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how I make the core and the handle part for the whip. So you're going to need a few bits and pieces. You're going to need some of this. This is artificial sinew, and what this does is it's going to be used for binding inside of the whip. If there's sections that we need to make stiffer, we're going to use it for that. And the nice thing about this is that when you wrap it around something, it lays nice and flat, and it's very strong. Now this one's been waxed, and that has an added advantage that it kind of, as you wrap it around things, it holds onto itself. So yeah, that one. The other thing you're going to need is some paracord. If you're in the UK, this is the company that I use. They're called Wild Elk, and I'll put the address down in the description. I don't make any money from these guys. They're just they're a very good company. Every time I've ordered loads of stuff from them. It always turns up on time, straight away, brilliant quality, and the best price I've found. So yeah, like I say, I don't make any money from them, but they're a great company. So yeah, use the genuine stuff if you can get it. If you're making whips for yourself and you're just starting out and you want to make things a bit more cheaply, you can use the Chinese cord, but the cheaper Chinese cord, you will probably run into problems with consistency, and the other thing that can happen is that the different colours can shrink at different rates under the wax. They're not always made out of the same stuff, so some might be made out of polyester, some might be made out of nylon. Yeah, go for the genuine article and you'll save yourself all those headaches, and you'll end up with a nicer whip. Like there's a sort of, I can't really describe it, but there's a density and a feel to this stuff which you just don't get with the Chinese stuff. Yeah, so you'll need cord. And the last thing which you're going to need is some 1/4" steel. Now, this is actually the handle spike which I've made for this whip which we're making, and although we're having an 11-inch handle, this is actually made up to 12 inches because you can see here this hole. This is what's going to go over our hook and give us something to pull against. It also stops it from twisting on the hook as much. So yeah, there's that one. Now I'll go into showing you how to make this in a second. 1/4", what is that in millimeters? If you're in the UK, you can probably order it as 1/4" as well, and I think that's what I did. Is my caliper's dead? There we go. Yeah, so millimeters. So yeah, about 6 millimeters if you're in the UK. But you can order it up as 1/4" probably. So what this is at one end here we have it rounded down to a smooth spike. I've taken all of the mill scale and any rust off it. I've boshed this down with a hammer and drilled a hole through so that can grip onto our hook. One other thing I think is important to mention is that this is probably about the maximum length of handle that I would go to in mild steel. If you're going longer, it usually means you've got a longer whip on the end of it, and you're going to have quite a lot of leverage. So you don't want this spike getting too thin, and if you were going to go longer than this, you might have to go into something like spring steel. And with that, there's going to be heat processes involved, so you're going to have to anneal it, you're going to have to retemper it and all that sort of stuff, which is kind of beyond the scope of this video. So we're going to stick with a shortish handle on this one, and we're doing it in mild steel. I'll take you through down to the workshop now to show you exactly how I made this time. Usually I would make this on this end here, I would make on the lathe, but as you might see from my other videos, the lathe is out of action at the moment, so I've made this with other tools. Now I've used power tools just to make it faster, but there's no reason why, with a careful eye and some patience, you couldn't do this by hand completely. Pro tip, you'll see in the video there, my drill bit is really blunt at the moment, and so it wandered a bit when I drilled it. It doesn't really matter, this doesn't have to be accurate. Like I said, it's going to be cut off at the end. All you want is a hole there and enough meat so that it's not gonna rip out when you pull on it. So I apologise for the poor quality of the video in the next couple of sections. I had the camera mounted in the vise, and the vibration from the grinder was playing havoc with it. Hopefully, though, you can make out what's happening just about. I've taken the sound off because yeah, it's not pleasant to listen to. So in the first part, I'm just taking the burr off the piece of metal to make it safer to handle. Here I'm mounting the handle into a drill chuck and using that to spin it against the grinder. Another way to do this, I've got a file here mounted in the vise. It's a half round file, and I'm just using that just to kind of refine the end. You'll see in a little bit as well, I start using some 80 grit sandpaper just to kind of take any mill scale and rust off any burrs, that kind of thing. You don't want it kind of mirror smooth because you want the cord to be able to grip onto the handle, but yeah, you don't want anything that can catch. And one other thing to bear in mind, especially if you're using someone else's drill, is that you don't really want to load a drill sideways. Like they're not really designed for, they're designed only sort of for pushing forces, really, the bearings in the drill. So I'm supporting it here with my other hand. As always, please be very careful when you use power tools. It's very easy to get hurt quite quickly, so if you're not comfortable with them, do this by hand, do it slowly, and be safe. Here I'm using a cent punch just to mark where I want my hole to go. It's all a bit irrelevant really because I used a blunt drill. You'll see it gave me some troubles later on. But you can see here the first mark I got not quite in the right place, and if you're not quite in the right place you can do what I did here, which is to turn the punch to the side, and you can actually kind of walk your mark, you can move your mark over a little bit, and then I'll just give a couple more taps just to make sure that it's exactly where I want it. So now that we have our handle made and we've got our cord, I'm just going to show you how I work out the different lengths which make up the core. So we're going to have one piece that runs all the way from the handle here all the way out to the end. Now something to be aware of is as you force pieces of cord inside each other, they're going to get fatter and fatter and fatter, and the end is going to contract like this. So we actually need a bit of extra length on this first strand here, and we're going to need something to tie off to, and a little bit extra just in case. So we would start from here, which is at 11 inches, and it would end out here, which is 84, so that's 73 inches, but I'm going to add in some extra, so we're just going to do that first strand in the core at 90 inches. So core strand number 1 equals 90 inches. Now strand number 2 isn't actually 24.5 inches long, it's actually 4.5 plus 4.5 plus 4.5, so that's 13.5 inches that we want this length to be. It's going to have 2 more pieces pushed inside of it, so we want a little bit more, and we want an inch on either end for working with, and you'll see as we go along where that comes in. So what did I say? 13.5 inches, so we're going to cut that to, say, 19 inches. So strand 2 will be 19 inches. Strand 3 is 4.5 plus 4.5, so that will be 9 inches, a couple of inches on either end. It's only going to have 1 piece inside of it, so it doesn't need quite as much, so we'll cut that one to 12 inches. And then the last piece is just a really short diddy piece. It's just going 1 section, so that's 4.5 inches. We want an inch on either end, 4.56, so we'll do that at 7 inches. There we go. So that's our lengths for the core, and I'll just go through now and show you how I prepare the core, prepare the cord, and how I get these pieces inside of each other, and how I attach to this piece, which is the handle. So here I am at the plating hook, and well, actually this one's used for the measuring out, so I've got my tape on here, and I have my cord. Now, when you first get your cord, it might come in a number of different ways. If it comes like this, which is like a 100-foot hank, when you open it up, you'll find that there's one end which is kind of free running, and the other end, if you pull on it, is going to make it want to knot up. So first thing I'm going to do is just carefully lay it down, find an end, and there we go. You see, this is our free running end. So the other thing I'm going to do just before I start measuring the distance is I'm just going to cut off this end here. When they send it to you, they cut the cord with a heat knife, and that's great because it means it doesn't fray, and you get the length of cord that you ordered. However, we're going to be taking these white strands from the center out, so what we're going to do is just clip that off to make that a little bit easier. So now I've got the end which is free running, I've got the rest of the bundle here. I'm just going to put that down on the floor, and I'm going to take this and loop it over my hook here. So this first one, we want 90 inches, so I'm going to pull this down to 40, and then I'm going to grab at the top again, pull it down to 50, and then I know that this here is our 90-inch length. So I'm going to cut that off there, and then we'll do the second strand, which looking back is 19 inches long. So I'm going to put that on the top there, I'm going to pull this down to 19 inches, pull it just here, and cut it off. Next one is 12 inches, so again, down to 12 inches, and I'll cut that off, and then the next one is 7 inches, so 7 inches, and we'll cut that off. Now the other thing this hook is useful for is to help us strip out, sharp scissors would be nice, is to help us strip out the inner strands from the core. So what I'm going to do is, this is our 90-inch piece, and the other ones you can probably just pull out straight away. But what we're going to do is just tease out these here, and as you see, as I pull on here, it's going to start to compress. So I need to pull that compression all the way down to the other end. Something that can help is this hook over here. So I'm going to put it on there and just do half hitches until it's secure. It doesn't need to be neat or anything like that. We're going to slip it off once it's done. But that gives me something to pull on, and it means that I can walk away from the hook. And there we have our 90-inch piece that's been gutted. Now, for the core, we don't need to do anything more than this. On the strands for the core, for the bellies and for the overlay, you might consider giving this an iron to make it nice and flat, which will certainly help when you're first beginning, because sometimes the cord can get twisted as you're plaiting it. But if you're careful, you don't need to do it, and with time you'll get your fingers to work in such a way that you'll be able to feel whether that's twisted or not, and you'll be putting each strand into place with your hands nicely. But like I say, if you're a beginner, you might want to just set your iron to the settings you use for nylon, and iron everything flat. But for the core, we don't need to do that, because the core is going to stay circular. It's not actually going to be plaited at all. Okay, so that's our 90-inch, that's all our pieces done, and I'll show you how I get those inside of each other and how we attach that to the handle. So now we're ready to start putting our pieces inside of each other, and I'm going to be using this tool here. This is one of the tools I described in my first videos, something I made myself, and it makes all this possible. So what I'm going to do, I need to get this piece inside of this piece. So what I'm going to do is take that, put it in between two pieces of wire, pull it up to the top as far as it will go, and then I'm going to take my pair of scissors and cut that off close to the thing. Now you can see there I've got these fuzzy ends sticking out. Now I'm going to use my lighter, and then I'm just going to torch that end there, and what happens is it makes kind of like a plug. I'm not going to touch it for a second or two, but it kind of makes a plug in the end of there, and it means that we can pull on this. It's very securely held inside of this, and there's nothing to catch as we're pulling through. So that's how I prepare this part. This is going to pull through into the other one, and on this one is going to have the other one put inside of it. Now, the one thing we don't want to happen is any of these little strands getting caught as we're trying to pull through, because on this one it won't be too difficult, but later on it's going to be a bit more difficult. So what I'm going to do is just kind of tap the end here, and you can see as I'm doing that, the end is just kind of splaying out. And in order to hold it in place, I'm just going to go around and just very lightly singe the ends, and it's just going to encourage it to keep this shape as we're working with it. There we go. So I'm then going to take my lacing needle, and I'm going to pass that inside the other one, like so. And you can see that as I'm doing this, I'm kind of compressing the compressing it to make it easier. There we go. So here we are, I have it ready to go, and the other thing I want is a steel ruler, just to make sure that I'm getting about 5.5 inches in between these two. I appear to have misplaced my steel ruler, so we're going to go with the measuring tape here. So as I pull, I'm just going to pull until this end is 5.5 inches along, and the reason for that is I want ½ an inch at this end to be able to cut it off, and then at the very end I'm also going to cut off another ½ inch from this end, and then that will leave our strand inside at being 4.5, which is what we wanted for our segment length. So how do I do that? So what I'm going to do is I move this up until it starts to compress, and then you'll see it just kind of comes over the end there, and it means I can slide this down, moving everything along. Measurement, so we're at 5 inches there, so just a tiny bit more. And there we go, roughly 5.5 inches. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut both these at this end, and I'm going to melt them together. And give them a really good solid melting. Now this molten section we will be removing later on, but this helps in the construction. This means that these two bits are going to be held nice and securely. The other thing you might do, if you've got them, is to use a pair of hemostats and just lock those onto there, and that will help lock those in place. But again, not essential. Just make sure you've melted that well enough. So now we have a bit of a problem. We've got our string inside of here, and we've got our lacing needle still inside. So first off, just check that that is completely set. Be careful, don't touch it, because it will be melty potentially and stick to your hands like napalm. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep forcing more cord over, and because this is quite a short length, it means that I can actually get to the first cord we've got here, and then that means I can cut this off, and then when I let it go, we have our first piece, and you can see here it goes all the way along, and then first piece ends just about there, and then we're down to one piece there. So next up, we want to get this one into this one, and we're going to want this at about the length which it needs to be. So it's going to want to be 9 inches plus ½ inch at the end, plus ½ inch at the other end, so 10 inches long. And I'm going to cut that off there. Now this time around I'm going to do it ever so slightly differently. I'm going to take out the stub of this one. I'm going to do the same preparation on this piece as we did before. So I'm just tapping down the end to open that up. And just ever so slightly singeing the ends, and all that's going to do is make them stick together. If you wish we was with my camera, so sorry about that. Stop the next part. So that piece I've then taken and I've cut that down to 10 inches, which is the 9 inches that we want it at, plus ½ inch at each end. So this is the piece that we're going to be laying it into, and if you remember, we want this to be 4.5 plus 4.5 plus 4.5, which is 13. And then again we're going to need ½ inch at each end, so that'll be 14. And I cut this out to about 19, so that's probably a little bit too long. So I'm going to take it out to say 16 inches. That'll give us enough for the expansion for this one, but it means that we won't have too much to have to force through past the needle. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Now the other end I've prepared just as before. We've got the end opened up, singed all the way around, and I'm just going to pass my needle through the center now. There we go. Now it's better if it doesn't come off the end here, but if it does, don't worry about it too much. We'll pull it through as we work on. So again, this goes in. I'm going to pull it up to the top. And the nice thing about this is if you just cut with your scissors as close as you can get to it, it leaves you just about enough fluffy stuff to be able to melt in and have this nice and neat. So we're going to do that again. I'm going to melt this in. And the wire itself will act a little bit like a heat sink, protecting the cord behind it. But you can see there, this makes a nice, very slim thing to be able to pull through. So as before, I'm going to make sure that none of these are going to get caught underneath as we're pulling through. And I'm just going to start feeding my cord over. Now you'll feel as we start going over this piece here, it's going to start getting a little bit tougher to move it along. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm working the kind of compressed tube towards the end there. And then once we get to the end like that, same as before, I've left myself a little bit of fluff out in the end so that everything can get melted nice and solidly in with each other. And again, don't touch that until it's completely set. Like I said, you can use a hemostat, but if it's well melted well enough, you shouldn't need to do it. Okay, so as before, we're just going to pull that through now. And cut off 1/2 inch. Now the reason I'm not melting these ends as they're going inside is because they're essentially going to be held by the cord that's outside of them. And if I was to melt this part, there would be a little lump inside. And we want everything to be as smooth as possible. So now that's done, I'm going to pull down from the end and try and make sure that everything is pulled down as tightly as it can be. Because if you find that this isn't quite worked down enough, it's going to be really difficult to get our 4th piece over the top. So now we have a piece that has one piece here that drops out, goes along, another piece here that drops out, and then this piece here will go inside of our last one to make up our core. So when we come to put in our last piece, we're going to do the same as before. So we tamp that down, give a little singe on the outside bits just so that it holds its shape. But because this is 90 inches long, if I try and get this needle in, I try and pull everything through, then I've got all this excess here which I would have to kind of compress over the top, and it just wouldn't happen. So instead what I'm going to do, I'm going to find out where this one ends. I'm going to give it a little bit more just to be generous, and then I'm going to go in through the side wall here. Now fairly often you can just force this tool straight in, but this fid here will make it a little bit easier. We're not actually trying to break any of the strands, we're just kind of trying to push them out the way. So you can see there I've gone in through the side wall, and that's straight into the center there. So now I'm going to take my needle, go into the top there, and bring this down. Now what I don't want to happen is this piece to go inside of here. Normally when I'd be working, I'd be having it on my lap and I'd push that down into my leg to prevent this from coming out. This time around, because I've got them here, I'm going to use the hemostats to act as that, so I can do this for you on camera. So I'm going to push this down until I've got my lacing needle exposed, and again like before, I'm just going to open these up, push the end through, pull it up to the top, and then I'm going to clip that off. And melt it in. yeah, you can see there I'm not too happy with that being a bit further down. I needed to get that right up to the end, so something to be aware of. Give it another quick melt. The melting serves two functions. It also stops any of these little bits on the edge here being able to catch threads as we go through. So now that's the situation we're in now. So I've got the end here. We've got our sort of funnel shape on the end of our cord. That's going to prevent any of these strands getting caught underneath. The reason for that is once we get up this end where there's already 3 pieces, if any of these strands get caught under, it'll become almost impossible to keep pulling that through. So now I'm going to do just the same as with the other ones. So we're just going to work it over that first bit and just keep working more and more thread, cord over the end like that. Now when we get down to this end, it is going to get a little bit more difficult. So what I'm going to do is just keep on moving it through. And I'm actually going to hold on to this piece of wire, a threading needle, and that's going to allow me to put quite a significant amount of force on, should it be needed. Now it's only 4.5 inches we've got here, which we need to actually get covered. So I'm just going to keep on working it. And I appreciate this may not be the easiest way of building a core, but the thing I like about this method is that it's very consistent, and it means that every whip is the same. We're not needing anything to bind these pieces together. Doing this in camera. So now we're nearly at the end. I've got about ½ inch or so to go. I don't actually want this this plastic piece in here, this melted piece, because that's going to create a lump, and everything is going to be held internally by all of this stuff. So I'm going to clip that off about ½ inch there, and I'm going to keep on working the rest of this cord until I've got about 1 inch or so past there. So there we go. So you can see that I've got, there's the end of the 3 pieces, and then I've got a little piece on the end here, which is going to help me attach to the handle. Now on the other end, I need to get this lacing needle off, so I'm going to work this through. I'm going to snip it off. And then when I pull this back through, you'll see the end just goes inside, just like that. So I hope I've described this well enough. It is a bit of a complicated thing to do, and it isn't the easiest way to make a whip. But like I say, it does make nice consistent ends, and hopefully you understand what I'm on about. So now we're ready to start binding our core here onto the handle. So what I'm going to do is just put that into the end there and try and force it as far up there as we can go. So I'm just going to keep on moving. There we go, just like that. Now part of the reason we've put a spike on here is to make room for this and this, so there's not a bit of a lump here. Now the binding is going to serve two functions. Not only is it going to hold this in place, but it's also, if you imagine, if everything is pivoting around here, all of the strain is just on the outside layer here. So what we actually want to do is stiffen this section up and move our pivot point further out, and then we want to spread the pivot point so that rather than it bending just in one place, it's bending evenly over a larger area. Now we're going to do this on each layer in the whip, and this first one doesn't have to be very long. So what we're going to do, we're going to attach on here. We can just use a simple half hitch. Like so. Again, I'm just going to make sure it's all nicely in place. I'm going to hold on to that tail, and then I'm going to start winding around myself. So I'm going to wind back onto the handle here and back over itself. And on this bit, I'm going to come up and down a few times, just to make sure that's all nicely secured. So now I'm going to start working my way along. And we're just going to cover that transition, and we're going to go maybe like an inch up here and then come back again, and then we'll come back again in a different manner. So I'm keeping quite a lot of tension. You can see here I'm holding on down here, and I'm keeping quite a lot of tension in this bit. Now I'm doing this just on camera at the moment. You might want to secure this in a vise, and then you can go round and round and round with your reel. Okay, so we have about an inch past there. We're going to come back over again, because you can see it still wants to bend here, so I still want more stiffness in that section. And then this time I'm going to go once more back down the other way. And we're just going to go a little bit further than that first time. And what that's going to do is it's going to mean that we're going to be thicker here than we are here. So it's going to be encouraged to bend further away from our point here. Now, as you can see, I've got a knot, so I'm going to have to remove that, which is probably going to be fiddly as hell. teased out. Yeah, so if you were doing this on the roll, like I usually do, you wouldn't have these issues. Anyway, bit of persuasion, we can get that knot out. Okay, and we're going to carry on a little bit further. And then we'll come back on ourselves once more. Okay, now just before I get to the lump from the first knot, we're going to secure this, so I'm going to do that again with a couple half hitches. Tight. And we'll do one more for a lock. So now this next section you don't really need to do. I'm going to do it just for neatness sake. But as we're going to be plaiting over the top of this with many layers, you don't really need to cut off or burn off the ends. I'm going to. So I'll just cut these off with a little bit sticking out. Lick your finger, push it in. And same again. There we go. So now we have our handle, our core, and then inside our core we've got these strands that drop off as we go along. And this is what we're going to be plaiting our first belly over the top of. So, I hope you found this video informative. I hope you found it useful. And you'll see as we go on each stage of making this whip. This might not look all that strong just at the moment, but remember this is going to have at least, it's going to have another 3 layers and another 2 sets of binding happening all in this section here. To make sure that this section is very strong indeed. Okay, well that's it for today. Leave a like if you like. Don't if you don't. Catch you later.